And if I understand correctly, we are, I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, then we got 20 minutes of question and answer. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And we got some questions lined up. Did you get those?
I got them. I read through them once quickly, and we'll do the improv. It'll work out fine.
I'm sure.
It'll be me, authentic me. No.
It's good. Where are you at right now?
I have 22-year-old twins who have moved out of the house and they're finishing up college, and I have used my son's old bedroom as an office.
That's good.
How's the weather in Minnesota today?
It's really nice. It's
That's good.
Yeah, it was super nice yesterday too. Nice and sunny, and we got to 70 2 days ago. It's a highlight.
Wow, that is a highlight. Finally, you had snow like 2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah, a lot of it.
There's some days I miss the snow down here in Houston, and there's some days I don't.
What do you miss the most about Minnesota?
Wow, I'd say the fresh air, the people are wonderful. Of course, people are wonderful in Texas too. Of course, my family's up there, my mom and dad, and I got a sister and her family up there. A lot of friends from high school and college. Yeah, just getting out into wide open spaces. Of course, there's a lot of that here too, but it surprised me after living in the Houston area for a while, going up to Minnesota and driving up towards the Collegeville area and St. Cloud area, how it seems like a frontier more than I remember. It certainly felt very normal, but it's very different. It feels like you're getting to much less populated space when you head a little bit north of Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm. Well, are we ready to? Do we get the signal to start?
Yeah, you're clear to start, Riley.
Oh, sorry. All right, everyone. This is astronaut Mark Vande Hei, and he's currently the assistant to chief astronaut for extravehicular activity and robotics. Mark, can you tell us more about what you do and how you got to where you are?
Sure. I'm going to spend about the next 8 to 10 minutes showing you some slides. Hopefully, this will just help you get more enthusiastic about questions to ask. So here we go. If that's okay with you all. Ready for this?
Yep.
All right. Now for my first technological challenge, share my slides. Everybody seeing the slides so far?
Yes, I do see that.
Yep.
All right. So first thing I want to show you is a view I took in January of 2018. You might recognize this spot right here. That's flashing in red. Of course, we can't interact very well, but that is, in fact, Minneapolis. To help orient you to what you're seeing, way out there, actually to the east. So this picture is upside down relative to a normal map. That's Chicago in Illinois. And then up north on the shore of Lake Superior is Duluth. So now that I got you oriented to what you're seeing, there's a little bit more Interstate 35. So south of us, south of Minneapolis, see this little circle right there? That is where you all are. So I have evidence right here. There's proof that you can see Cannon Falls from space. So in September of 2017, well before taking that picture, I launched to space with these three gentlemen. This is a picture taken just after we got into our space suits, and they checked out the suits to make sure they were working properly. And then we reported to a Russian commission in Kazakhstan, went out to our vehicle, climbed up the steps, and got ready to board. I'll tell you, at this moment, I was thinking to myself, my goodness, I am about to leave the planet in 90 minutes. I have a lot to get done. So then we launched. I'm really racing through this. We launched real late at night or early in the morning on that day. After about 8.5 minutes of being on top of that rocket, we were traveling 17,500 miles an hour. This is what it looked like in the rocket while the thrusters were firing. It looked like a lot of light and violence to my family out there on the ground watching. But inside the spacecraft, I was a little disappointed. It was such a smooth ride. I didn't have a very dramatic story to tell. Everything worked extremely smoothly. And again, 8.5 minutes later, once we got to orbit and those thrusters shut off, this is what the view I was treated to. At this moment, wearing a harness to keep myself buckled down into that spacecraft seat, it felt a lot like being at the top of a roller coaster, just getting ready to drop down. That sense of kind of falling or rising up in the harness that you might have felt on a roller coaster. But for me, that same feeling lasted for about 6 hours. Those 6 hours were what it took us to get to the International Space Station. I was supposed to be very quiet because it's very, very dynamic moment as we approach the spacecraft. Both spacecraft traveling at 5 miles a second, but the relative speed is very, very slow between the two. But I was so blown away by how massive they were that I couldn't help but say, wow. And the commander just to my right looked at me and gave me the be quiet symbol because he had to concentrate. Then about 2.5 hours after that, we were able to climb on board the space station. On board the space station were already 3 crew members who had spent a couple months on board, and they were there to greet us. So we formed an international space station crew of 6. Being on the space station, which is a national laboratory, is all about the science. The astronauts are really like laboratory technicians. Here you see me installing a gas cylinder into a combustion facility. There was more than 200 experiments that happened while I was on board. Wide variety of things, even growing plants. We built satellites, deployed satellites into space. Lots of those things were going on behind the racks. Some of those experiments were us because we were taking blood samples, other bodily fluid samples to help understand how humans react to being in that environment over long periods of time. Another big thing we did on the space station was manage the resupply of the space station. So what you're seeing in this picture is a view from one of the windows outside the space station looking down towards the Earth that we used to help manipulate that robotic arm to actually reach out and grab a spacecraft. In this case, it was SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft. Another spacecraft we use is Northrop Grumman's Cygnus spacecraft. Both of those spacecraft deliver cargo to the space station. SpaceX actually has the ability to return their cargo back to the Earth. So a lot of science gets put back on that spacecraft to safely return to the Earth. And soon, we're hoping they're going to successfully launch people and start having commercial U.S. spacecraft fly people back and forth from the Earth to the space station. While I was on board, we did 5 spacewalks. I would love to somehow give you all the feeling of what it feels like to go outside of a spacecraft 240 miles above the surface of the Earth. This is my best attempt. So that's me on my second spacewalk. I was feeling much more comfortable than my first spacewalk. On my first spacewalk, I was probably gripping very hard with both hands the entire time. But then I realized that it was going to be just fine if I relaxed, and I was much more relaxed the second time. This is actually zoomed in quite a bit on the picture that was taken by a crewmate of mine from inside the spacecraft. This is the actual picture, so you can see the Earth 240 miles beneath my feet. But above me, hopefully you can see my mouse up here, there's another crew member who's outside the space station with me, who was above me. He was actually doing the primary work. I was trying to support manipulating him to get into the right place. But he took a picture of me at the same time, and here's what that picture was. So you can see how it's just hard to get your head wrapped around how wide open all the space is around you as you're out there. And in fact, if you look at my visor, you can see the reflection of my crewmate, Randy Bresnik, in that visor, and you can see the red stripes on his thighs there. Also, to make sure I'm always safe, there's a safety tether. If you look coming off my back, you'll see a thin line. That's a metal cable that we get very good at paying attention to make sure we're always safely tethered to the space station. Also had a lot of fun on the space station. There's lots of things you can do science-wise on the space station, which means there's lots of things that humans can do. I got really good at doing backflips up there. I will never try a triple-decker single thing. I guess it's like a one-person base pyramid, I guess is what you call this. I'll never do this on the ground. After 6 months of lots of work, those robotic operations I talked about, science experiments going on all the time, and spacewalks, we came home. This is the view from the circling Russian search and rescue forces as the spacecraft, thankfully, under the parachute. I was really happy that the parachute worked, descended back to the Earth. And I was also really happy once the search and rescue forces helped extract us out of the spacecraft. I was able to talk to my family. And I'm going to race through the rest of this to get to your questions real quickly. Space programs have had a huge impact on how we perceive the Earth. This is a view I had of the Earth from space, and that's actually the Himalayas. The way the clouds looked from space were amazing. They were like islands sometimes. The different colors of the water, especially in the Caribbean, were amazing to see. On the other side of the humidity spectrum, deserts in North Africa were gorgeous. We traveled around the Earth once every 90 minutes, so we could see a sunrise or sunset every 45 minutes like this. Sometimes, if you take enough pictures, you might capture lightning from space. Earth's cities were gorgeous, and this is a picture of New York in the foreground. You can see the Great Lakes in Canada in the background, even all the way up to the Northern Lights, really far in the background. And if you get the chance, I'd recommend you look at All Alone in the Night on YouTube. It's a video about 7 minutes long by David Peterson. And with that, hopefully I've given you enough to pique your interest and ask some good questions. Let's go to the questions. And I think I stopped sharing the video, correct?
Yeah.
Or the slides?
Yes, you did. Thanks, Mark.
All right.
That was very...
Zoe, did you want to start the questions?
Sure.
You kind of touched on this already, but during your 4 spacewalks, what was going through your head as you were kind of floating there in space?
What was going through my head was, don't mess this up. That's the short answer. The longer answer is, gosh, it really, we trained so much on doing all that stuff right, and we had so much work to do. It was really easy to stay focused on what seemed like familiar territory on the space station itself. We've got some very good simulators underwater for that. But every now and then, you'd look up and see the Earth, and it was kind of mind-boggling, actually.
Sarah, you want to ask the next question?
Thanks for that question. Great one.
Okay, Zoe, do you want to ask the next question?
Sure. What is the most difficult thing about performing spacewalks?
The most difficult thing about performing spacewalks, I would say, is finger fatigue. So if you imagine when you're in a vacuum, we got to make sure we have some pressure in the atmosphere inside that suit. So we maintain 4 pounds per square inch, which is certainly less than the 14 pounds per square inch we are experiencing right now. But that still means there's a pressure differential across the suit. So every time you make a fist or grab onto something, you are fighting that pressure differential. And eventually, it kind of felt to me, my hands were raw enough, it felt a little bit like the inside of that glove or gloves were a little bit like sandpaper. Your hands just get kind of raw after about 6. Our spacewalks were between 5.5 and 7.5 hours. And you're not moving on your feet, you're moving using your hands the entire time. So that can be pretty exhausting.
Blake, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah. So, what do you bring with you on the trip? Like personal stuff, and like what did the company or NASA have you bring up?
Wow, great questions. Personally, I brought up my wedding ring, for example. But I also brought up pictures of my family. I had some mementos to return to significant organizations that helped me get there, like schools, clubs that I was involved in, things like that. And then NASA certainly provides all the clothing, all kinds of other things like that. But the things that, and we don't, I guess I didn't really have to pay attention to bringing stuff up other than my personal items, because you can imagine there's a lot of people that are involved in packing that spacecraft. So when I showed up to get in, I just had to be able to squeeze past all the cargo to get into my seat. And then I certainly had to pay attention to unpacking things and putting it in the right place so other people could find it when we actually needed to use it.
Luke, would you like to ask a question about an Aquanaut? Luke?
I don't think Luke is on the call, is he?
Sanskar, would you like to ask?
I have a lot of background noise right now, so.
All right, Riley Magoo, can you ask the question, please?
You want the Aquanaut one?
Yep.
What was it like being an Aquanaut compared to an astronaut?
So we use that Nemo mission, the one I did as an Aquanaut, as a way to help prepare us to do space flights. So the similarities are things like being in a small environment, living with a lot of other people. Of course, you want to be able to get along really well with each other. The biggest difference, I would say, the space station is huge. The inside of the space station is about the size of a 6-bedroom house. You could easily work all day in a part of the space station and not see your other 5 crewmates. As an Aquanaut, it was much more like a little RV, a very small RV. We were constantly having to step around each other. Everything we did, it was basically a 2-room cabin. And there's also a big difference. I would actually say in some ways, it's a little more dangerous living underwater at 60 feet, because the pressure difference is actually much greater between the surface sea level and 60 feet below sea level than it is between sea level and 240 miles above sea level. So to come back to the surface, we had to give our body about 14 hours to adjust, coming from living 60 feet underwater for 9 days. And coming back to Earth from the space station, we were living at the same pressure as we have on the surface of the Earth. We were able to get home in about 5 hours. So we're actually closer to the Earth's surface in a way on the space station than we were underwater for that many days.
Deegan, would you like to ask about what it takes to be a scientist?
Okay, so the question was, what does it take, or what is the process to be a scientist for NASA?
So I would say there's there's probably a lot of scientists that work at NASA that have a lot of different ways to do that job. So what I'm going to do is focus, if you don't mind, I'm going to change the question a little bit and answer what it takes to become an astronaut. Is that okay?
Yes.
So right now, you have to actually have a master's degree in a technical field like science, engineering, physical sciences, biology, physics, sometimes computer science. We've got medical doctors that are astronauts. And this application process that is in work right now, for the first time, we're requiring a master's degree. You've got to have 3 years of experience that builds on your academic experience. And to be a NASA astronaut, you have to be a U.S. citizen. And I would say another big, very important part of this is you've got to be able to pass a NASA flight physical, so you got to keep yourself healthy. And because we don't want to send people to space that need medical care, because it's hard to get medical care to you when you're there. And then an unwritten requirement is that you're a person, I would say, that other people would enjoy living with when they're isolated from the rest of humanity.
Ryan,
Great question.
Ryan, would you like to ask your question?
So I'm not Ryan, but what I was wondering is, what's the best personality trait you can have to be an astronaut?
Another great question. So I think you really always want to do your best, but you have to be much more invested in the people around you being their best than you being better than everybody else. It's really important that you're a team player. In fact, even trips to the top of Mount Everest, what we found is that successful expeditions are much more dependent on the interpersonal skills of the people on the expedition than they are necessarily in the technical skill. So human beings really need to be good at looking out for each other and taking care of each other. And that's an important part of the personality set for an astronaut, especially as we start going further and further away from the Earth.
Isaiah, would you like to ask a question, please?
Yep. So I was told that when I meet intelligent and successful people, I should ask what books they read. So what would you say is your favorite book?
Gosh, this might be a little bit embarrassing because I'm going to convince everybody I'm a geek. I really like the Lord of the Rings books. I thought they were really good, and I'm saying that because I used the criteria for if it's a book that I read more than once, I would say that fits into my list of favorite books. I certainly have enjoyed a wide variety of books from fiction, action, drama to quite honestly, lately I've enjoyed a lot of history books as learn about the places I've lived in.
Do you want to ask your question?
What was the food like, and how was the food?
The food was camping food primarily. It was good though. We've got rehydratable foods. Those are probably the best. Of course, they're light because we take all the water out, and we've got a thing called a potable water dispenser that lets us insert exactly the right amount of fluid per the recipe, if you want to call it that, on the outside of the package. And then we'd let it sit for a certain amount of time to get rehydrated. And, I had beef patties that way, had shrimp cocktail that way. Then there's also things we call common off-the-shelf things. Some granola bars, protein bars, even ground coffee in a pouch you could add hot water to and sip your coffee through a straw in space. The Russians were really big on canned food. They actually had kind of an easy bake oven type toaster for canned foods, and I really enjoyed those. And then the things I honestly didn't enjoy as much were things that were much closer to a military ration. We call those thermal stabilized. It's basically canned food, but instead of a can, it's in a pouch. Oh, one thing though, I did find that no matter what, if I added a lot of garlic paste to food, I liked it better.
That's weird. Hey, so I got a question. When you're eating and stuff, like say you got one of the cans or whatever and you're opening it, does like the food get everywhere?
Yes, it absolutely. You end up getting really good at managing that. I was the only rookie on the space station when I first got up there, and I definitely remember many times opening up a type of food for the first time. Let's say it was rice, and I opened that rice up, and people were like, "Oh, be good," and I didn't know what they were trying to warn me about. And I opened up the rice, and the rice grains went everywhere. That's why I became a big fan of the garlic paste. I used it as food glue. Also, olive oil worked as like food glue, so I'd open it up a little bit eventually, spray something that was sticky inside the pouch, and that would keep it all together. Sesame seeds were a big mess. We got those on the space station, though. And what I would do is eat those next to a air intake with a fine mesh on it. So any sunflower seeds that inevitably escaped would drift to that mesh, and I could vacuum them up later. There is a stain on the ceiling of the space station. That we call it the overhead side of the space station, above the table, because I was eating I opened up a can of Russian soup, and it was really red, and I forgot to put the napkin over the top like I was trained to do. So as soon as I punctured it with the can opener, that juice went flying up, and it just kept going up until it hit the ceiling. Could not get that one cleaned up no matter how hard I tried.
You said you dealt with SpaceX spacecraft. What was that like?
It was busy. It's a really neat spacecraft. It was kind of fun packing it up to return to Earth. I have some experience packing things up in the military in the back of a C-130, and the cargo net was very much like a military cargo net. So it occurred to me, I felt like I was in a really, really high altitude plane, getting ready to drop something off the plane in a parachute. But SpaceX is, of course, very, very different from that. Every time SpaceX came to the space station, though, it was super busy. The reason was it's the only U.S. spacecraft right now that can return those science experiments to the Earth, and some of those things have to be frozen, and of course they've got to stay frozen for the trip back. And so the timing is incredibly precise about what you pack when, how you pack it with ice packs around it. So as soon as SpaceX came up, we knew there was just no rest for a while.
Christy, do you have a question that you want to ask?
Hey, can I ask a question real quick? Another one?
Oh, sure.
So do you think you'd ever get to a point in your life where you'd ride on a SpaceX vehicle with your family just for fun?
With my family, if I could afford it, yes.
Oh, cool.
Okay, how did it feel to be on a mission that allowed NASA to double the time they allot for research?
I was really proud of that. A lot of that had to do with the fact that we had more U.S. segment crew members on board than normal. But honestly, I wasn't too fixed. I had a little bit of concern about when people thought, "Oh, we're going to break a record." I just wanted to do my job. I didn't really, and those things kind of fall out. And honestly, that whatever records we set have been broken many times over since then. So yeah, I was just proud to be able to contribute. Quite honestly, I would say that was how it felt.
Blake, do you have any additional questions that you thought of or on this list?
No, not really. I kind of got kicked out of the meeting, so I'm back now.
Welcome back, Blake.
Thanks.
So let me ask a question, Mark, that was on the list. But what was the most memorable or the most important experiment that you actually participated on SpaceX? You talked a lot about experiments, and I just kind of want to get a flavor for what they were and what your most memorable one was, maybe.
So the most memorable. So again, there was more than 200 experiments that happened on the space station. But so many of those actually we weren't involved with. It was hard to get kind of emotionally invested in those if you didn't even see what was happening. So the things that I appreciated the most were the things that I actually got to see in action. So there's one experiment called Spheres, which is really fun. It was basically satellites, a couple of them, up to 3, that we would let go of inside the space station. Orbital mechanics works just as well inside the space station as outside the space station, except for the fact that there's some ventilation, so there might be a little extra wind flow that you wouldn't have outside the space station. But it makes it a great platform for experimenting on how to control satellites. So college students wrote algorithms to control satellites, and we were able to carefully let go of the satellites inside the space station and watch how they performed. They could do docking maneuvers. Sometimes those mini satellites actually tried to tug on what we call a slosh tank to simulate a broken down satellite to see what the physics would be behind trying to move an expired satellite, if you want to call it that, out of an orbit into a different one. Maybe a good way to clean up space debris. Another experiment that I remember, not so much because it was fun to watch, but because it was challenging to do my part to make it work, was something called ELF, which means electromagnetic levitation furnace. I had to take very, very tiny pellets that the experiment was done on and insert them into a container. And it was just, I thought for sure I was going to lose some of those pellets, but I managed to not lose them with careful use of tape. But that's an interesting experiment. And just to give you another example of the type of things we do. Anytime you're doing metal experiments with heating metals up, the crucible, the container for the experiment, actually interferes with the results because the crucible will get heated up and affect the purity of the experiment. But you can, if you can get the experiment to float, so basically not be contained, on the space station you can do that, and they used electromagnetic fields to hold these metals in spot. Then you can go ahead and heat those metals up and still do the experiment. So that was an interesting experiment to learn about. I still couldn't watch it happen real time because it was behind the panel, but it was neat to get my hands on it and help reload it, if you will.
Riley, can you go to one of the questions that you got from YouTube?
Yeah. So Mark, one question from YouTube. Why is it important for young people to stay engaged and involved in space?
Wow, I think so.
Or in science, sorry, in science.
In science. So I think there's so much good that can come out of science. Quite honestly, science helps us understand reality, and science gives us a way to make decisions, to learn about the environment that we live in, and to figure out the right things to do. And science tries really hard to take away the human emotional part of it and just get down to the facts and once you understand those, we can make really good decisions. And that's important for society. It's important politically. It's important for the environment. It's important for technology. So it just has impacts all over the place.
Thank you.
Christy, do you have another question you wanted to ask?
Yep. Can you talk about your background specifically, like your education, and then what your role on the space station was?
Sure. So my background, I went to college and I got a degree in physics. While I was a college student, I was in the Reserve Officer Training Program. So honestly, the Army paid for my college, and then I was obligated to be in the Army after college. My expectation was I was only going to spend 5 years in the Army, do my obligation, and get out. And then 27 years later, I finally got out. The Army also sent me to graduate school, which was pretty nice. And that was certainly an essential piece of me being able to get hired at NASA. And another part of that was the Army actually loaned me to NASA to work in the astronaut office. I never expected to become an astronaut. I enjoyed what I was doing while I was there and volunteered for everything possible because I figured I had 3 years of this cool opportunity to work at NASA. And I really enjoyed it a lot. And I think that probably just helped out with the weird. I still am a little bit puzzled that I actually got this job because I never ever thought this was a real thing. I thought becoming an astronaut was about as realistic a possibility for me as becoming Spider-Man or Superman or a professional football player at 5'6". So I just didn't think it was possible at all. So my advice would be don't count yourself out. That the only way to make sure you are going to get a no is to never try. Yeah, that's my career in a minute.
We got some more questions from the audience. What would you say that your preparation for being in the space station with only a few people helped prepare you for social isolation now?
Yeah, I would say that's certainly it's easier here. I can walk outside. I can feel sunshine. I can stand in the rain. I can go for a run outside. There was times on the space station when I first got up there when I remember I was on a bike. So there's 3 different exercise devices on the space station. One of them is a bicycle. You don't need a seat on that bike. You just hold onto the handles with your hands. But for some reason, when I closed my eyes while I was on that bike, it felt like I was spinning sideways. And it just was like, okay, I just need something to seem normal. And then when you run on the treadmill with bungee cords holding you down on the treadmill, and you're actually running on the wall. And so you got to convince yourself, don't think about the fact that I'm running towards the floor right now. Because you can really kind of get yourself kind of mentally stressed out at the weirdness of it all, or you could just enjoy the weirdness of it all. I remember the other exercise device is a resistive exercise device. And every time I would sit up to do a crunch, I would have a great view of the earth. But I was doing crunches with my feet pointing towards the earth, which is also kind of weird because my orientation was strange. Because I was also mounted on the wall while I was doing crunches. So, yeah, I think I lost track of your question as I just kind of started rambling.
Oh, you answered it perfectly. Another one was, why do you think it's important to continue space exploration?
I think space exploration gives us a way to focus our efforts towards advancing technology, towards basically space exploration is challenging. It pushes us. I have a military background. I can tell you a lot of the big advances we've made as humans technologically have been associated with warfare. That's because it's hard, it's challenging, it pushes us to do things and I would much rather make those advances associated with space exploration than warfare. So I think human beings are really hardwired to explore. Another thing it does is it just helps us understand our place in the universe. That picture I showed you of the Earth from the Apollo program, that was the first time humans really started to get that the Earth is this isolated little spot in a vast universe. I mean, seeing it from far away. And that changes your perspective of how limited the resources are on the Earth. And it changes how we behave.
Yeah, sure does. So follow-up question, are you on a future mission? And if you are, what is the future mission?
There's lots of opportunities for future missions. I'm still an active astronaut, so that means that I'm still eligible to be assigned to a space flight. However, as far as I'm concerned, I'm still getting used to being back on the Earth and enjoying it a lot. I've told my boss that when they need me to fly, I will say yes, but I've asked to not think they're doing me a favor by asking me to do a space flight yet. We'll see. It's possible that I'll say, okay, it's time, let's do this. If you got the chance, I'm chomping at the bit to get me up there again. But right now, I'm just enjoying being around my family and all the things that I have a renewed appreciation for about having access to on the Earth, even in social isolation.
Christy, do you want to ask one of the questions from YouTube Live? It's on the Google document.
I have two questions. He's looking, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so first one is, what's the coolest thing about space? In your opinion, at least.
The coolest, most fun thing about space, I would say for me after the first month, when I really got used to it, was the absolute freedom of motion. I could go down the kind of the long tunnel of the space station, hands first, grab onto a handrail at a corner, let my feet swing wide, and then go into the next direction, then make a 90-degree turn and go the next direction feet first. I got comfortable enough with moving around the space station. I could be talking to someone with my feet on the deck, and then with my arms crossed, I could look up and say, oh, there's the bag I need on the ceiling. I could just kick my feet up, keep my arms crossed, hook them on the ceiling, and then start to work like it was the floor. It's just really, really fun. Yeah, it's really, in fact, at one point, we watched, once a week, we would get the whole crew together and watch a movie. And so we'd strap ourselves down with bungee cords so we wouldn't bump into each other all the time. And then we watch a movie. And I remember watching somebody jump from building to building in this action movie. And they went on what we're all used to, this kind of parabolic trajectory. But everything in this frame of reference of the internal volume of the space station, everything you moved went in a straight line. Even though we really wasn't doing that because it was falling towards the Earth. I don't want to get into that many details, but my frame of reference, everything went in a straight line. And I remember looking at that thinking, wait, that looks weird, because I was moving place to place, but always going in a straight line. In fact, when I threw something to somebody else, when I first got to the space station, it would always hit the ceiling because I was so used to compensating by throwing things slightly up to get it to fall back down to the right place. And then when I came back to Earth, after I got used to throwing things to people in a straight line on the space station, if I was playing catch with one of my children, I would hit their feet because I lost the ability to compensate. It came back again eventually. But human beings are very, very adaptable. So adapting to that environment was really fun.
Also, that kind of leads me into my second one, the whole movie thing. Have you guys ever watched Gravity?
I watched Gravity before I flew, yes.
Yeah, how does that make you feel about the whole flight and everything?
Well, Gravity was an entertaining movie. Lots of good visuals, and I think they did a really good job of helping you feel what it would be like to be inside of a spacesuit. But the science really wasn't all that good. There was a lot of, let's say, poetic license they took with things. You can't change your orbit very easily with a fire extinguisher.
Were there any movies that you've seen that have made you kind of nervous about it, or no? Like Apollo 13 or anything?
I wouldn't say it made me nervous, but I can tell you, I watched First Man, and I got choked up repeatedly because that movie than any other movie I've seen really got the emotions across of how it felt like getting strapped into a spacecraft, and then everybody else leaving to go to a safe place. And then this kind of feeling where people are leaning over you and reaching around you and doing things to you that you can't see because you're so tightly packed in the spacecraft. That brought all those emotions back. The other thing they did really, really, really well was kind of this give you the sense of this beauty and also a little bit of discomfort when you get to orbit. And I think it was all about the lighting. So I got to talk to the director for the movie, and I mentioned that to him. He said that, yeah, we use point lighting. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, NASA told us that in space, the sun is a point light. And I realized that all of the light you've ever experienced inside the atmosphere, on the surface of the Earth, is sunlight that's been scattered by the atmosphere. So it's kind of spread out. When you get to space, it's one big bright spotlight there. So when the sun shines into this little spacecraft that you're in, it's very stark, bright spots and shadows. And it's beautiful, but it's just a little unsettling because everything's just a little off. It just feels strange.
How many years did you spend preparing to go to space?
Gosh, in some ways, I would say I've spent my entire life, and I'd say those of you that want to be astronauts, you're already preparing. But officially, I became an astronaut candidate in 2009. Spent a couple years as an astronaut candidate, and then I actually flew in 2017. So if you count 2009 to 2017, that's 8 years of where it was my job to prepare to go to space. I did launch in 2017. So yeah, 8 years.
So, Mark, we do have a lot of younger kids on this call too, some 7th and 8th graders, and I mentioned earlier that I'm one of the high school robotics coaches, so we have some of the high school kids. But what advice would you give to the younger kids that are on this call, the 7th, 8th graders that are thinking about moving towards, science and technology and all this stuff that really sounds cool?
I would say really nurture your curiosity. Science takes a lot of hard work and a lot of attention to detail. And there's all kinds of science fields. So because it's going to take a lot of hard work, it's easier to succeed with those things if you find something you're passionate about and you're really, really curious about. And it's not always going to be fun. So you got to stick through some of those hard times to get to the good times. But yeah, ask a lot of questions. That's probably something that I wish I had been better about, is not being embarrassed to ask a question, because that's an essential part of learning is asking those questions.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. So we have time for about one more question, and then we will have to wrap it up.
Mark, I'm sure you've heard that Minnesota closed their schools for the rest of the year for distance learning. What advice would you give to the graduating class and to everybody else that's in this time period as a student?
I would think, much like being on the space station, this is a good time to kind of make a list of the things that are uniquely good about this time and try to focus on that. I listened to an interview with Christina Cook recently, who spent, close to a year on the space station. And that was one of the things that she did that helped her be so successful when she was up there, is decide what mental pattern you're going to keep on repeat. You know, what's the thing you're going to, which internal voice you're going to encourage to be the loudest. And I would say try to, because like, for example, for me right now, I spent a lot more quiet evenings sitting around with my family because my commute to work is really short. I'm spending more time online with my family because we're so isolated. I'm talking about my extended family in Minnesota, New York, Los Angeles. We're all getting together at the same times every now and then to have video chats, and we weren't doing that type of thing before. So there's some things we can take away that we'll really find that were special about this. We might actually miss once this is over with. So try to focus on those things that are special and good about this time.
Thank you.
Hang in there, everybody.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mark. Riley or Joe, did you want to say any final words?
Well, thank you for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate that, and I think it means a lot to the kids for you to kind of shed some light on your experience in your life, and hopefully that encourages them.
Well, honestly, you all are encouraging me. So thanks for the time to be able to share with you, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Enjoy the weekend coming up.
You too.
Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you later. Have a great weekend.